Here it is, Royal Enfield's third bike on the 650cc platform is finally here. This is the Super Meteor and it takes that engine and puts it into a more laid-back cruiser. Now, it shares its name with the Meteor, but not much else. It's got the 650cc engine, it's got a new chassis compared to the Interceptor and the Conti GT, different ergonomics, different styling. It's also going to be Royal Enfield's most expensive motorcycle, and it is Royal Enfield's heaviest motorcycle. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's not waste any time and get right into it. But before we do that, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the Evo India channel and leave a comment down below. What do you think of Royal Enfield's Super Meteor 650? Now let's start with the styling, because I think styling is going to be one of the biggest draws of the Super Meteor 650. In some way, this is the spiritual successor to the Thunderbird. That was a cruiser, this is a cruiser. And in my opinion, this is a much better looking motorcycle. It's much more proportional. The way it flows from front to rear, from rear to front, it looks much better put together. It feels more synthesized, the whole thing. Now, it looks a lot beefier than before, and I think a lot of that is down to the tank. It's a nice, wide, chunky tank. The tank itself holds 15.7 liters of fuel. Important if you want to do long distance cruising. Below that, the engine is the same, but the casing around the engine has been redesigned, and again, that looks a little beefier. The seat, also really nice, wide, chunky. All of that gives the Super Meteor a really wide, planted stance, and I really like that. Front and rear, you've got LED lights. You've got an LED headlamp up front, an LED tail lamp in the rear. Both of them look really nice, really premium. Something that you will notice, USD forks. That's the first time a Royal Enfield gets USD forks, and I'll talk about how they feel on the road in a bit. Your wheels, you've got alloy wheels as standard, 19s in the front, 16s in the rear, and again, they do a good job of adding that proportionality, that stance to the motorcycle. There's a couple of key things that really uplift the way this motorcycle feels. So on the switch cubes, you've got this anodized metal finish, feels really premium. The dials, they're housed in gloss black finish. The levers, they feel good, they're adjustable even. And the quality of materials, even the way the mirrors feel, the way the bars feel, the way everything around the motorcycle feels, it feels premium, it feels upmarket, you know, and that goes a long way because this is going to be Royal Enfield's most expensive bike and it has to justify that price in some way. Other things that caught my eye, the exhausts have been redesigned. No longer do they sit outside, but they've gone underneath the motorcycle, and that makes it feel a little narrower and slimmer when you're riding it. You've also got really chunky footrests. The shifter, you've got a heel and toe shifter, another cruiser touch. Another point to note before we move away from the styling is that this is the tourer variant of the bike. So there's two variants, there's the standard, there's the touring, and the touring variant gets this windscreen, it gets the touring seat, which is a little wider, more comfortable, got a wider pillion seat as well, and you get that backrest as standard on the motorcycle. Okay, now before we get to the riding, I just want to climb onto the bike and show you what the ergonomics are like, because again, I think that's going to be critical for a lot of riders who want to get onto the Super Meteor. So swinging a leg over is actually very easy, not a very tall bike. And then you pick the bike up, a little heavy, but once you've got it up, you're okay. And the seat height is not very high. This is 740 mm off the ground. So even shorter riders won't have any trouble. I'm 5'10", I can stand very comfortably. Another critical point to why you can stand comfortably is the tank. It tapers over here and the seat tapers as well. So you've got actually a very narrow waist over here where you can stand over the bike. Unlike the Interceptor and the Conti GT also, the exhausts don't stick out over here. So they're under the bike. You can really keep your feet snug close to the bike, so it's really comfortable to stand on this motorcycle. Now, when you get onto the bike, you sit comfortably. Your feet, it's in a very forward riding position. They push forward, typical cruiser fashion, and this is actually very nicely done. And when you get your arms onto the bike, like this, you're not canted forward. Very often in cruisers, you find yourself with your feet forward and your arms forward. That's not a very comfortable position to be in. This, where your feet are forward and you're nice and straight, yeah? This is actually a very comfortable position. Even if you're a little shorter than me, I don't see you having a problem with the handlebars. If you're taller than me, this should be very easy for you. But If you want an even more laid back position, Royal Enfield will sell you a touring handlebar, which probably sits a little more behind, so you can be even more laid back on the motorcycle. That's an aftermarket accessory, but even as the standard motorcycle, this is a very comfortable, straightforward riding position. Now let's talk about the engine. This is the same engine as the other two 650 twins. You've got 648 centimeters cubes and the peak outputs remain the same as well. However, there have been some small changes. The intake is different, the exhaust, they're obviously different, and that has also led Royal Enfield to map it a little differently. One of the key mapping changes that they've done is to get the torque available from low down. So you can get 80% of peak torque right from 2500 RPM. Now, what does that feel like on the road? I think that mapping difference makes a huge change to the way the motorcycle's character is. It's very, very tractable on our roads. So whether you're setting off in first gear, you've got torque right from the get-go, or even if you're cruising in a high gear at a lower speed, you can be in sixth gear at 50 kilometers an hour and the motorcycle just chugs along. At 50 kilometers an hour, you roll onto the throttle and it'll pick up and go. You know, there's no stuttering, stalling. It's a very tractable engine. That tractability really plays into the cruiser nature of the motorcycle. It feels very laid back, very relaxed. It's not asking for too many shifts too often, and you can just kick back, relax, and use the throttle as you please and get moving with the motorcycle. Now let's talk about refinement. This engine I found to be really refined. In terms of vibrations, there were nearly nothing at the bar and the seat, very slight vibrations at the pegs, but nothing too intrusive. And I feel like this is a motorcycle that you can spend long hours on without tiring yourself out. When motorcycles vibrate a lot, they bring in a little bit of fatigue with them. This, it feels creamy, smooth, it feels relaxed, and in that sense, it's a motorcycle that you can probably spend a lot of time on, do long days on without getting tired. Something else that will really help you do long days and long distances is the performance. I really enjoyed the performance on this bike. Now, in terms of performance, it's not too different from the Interceptor, but I feel that slug of torque low down, the way it hits you right from the get-go, it feels really nice. And getting up to speed is really easy. You can sit at 120 kilometers an hour all day, no stress. You can do the speed limit on our best highways, no stress, and it'll happily chug along. The Meteor 350 obviously won't be as effortless as this, and if you look back into Royal Enfield's back catalogue, the Thunderbird 500, even that couldn't do the sort of effortless cruising that this motorcycle does. This really feels effortless in the way it goes about its business. Whether you just want to sit at a cruising RPM and sit there all day for hours on end, it'll do that very happily. But even if you want to downshift, get into third gear, get into fourth gear, ring it out a little bit, it'll more than comply. At the end of the day, this is the same engine in the Conti GT. So if you want some sprightliness out of it, if you want some sporting character out of it, you just need to get down a few gears and give it the beans. It will move. And it's really enjoyable when you rev it out. It's creamy smooth. It brings with it a nice slug of performance. It sounds really nice when you're on the bike or even when you're standing off the bike. This exhaust note, it's really nice and rumbly. And overall, it's just a nice motorcycle to ride. Every time you get onto it, you're smiling because it's just so much fun to just roll onto that throttle and get moving. Now let's talk about the chassis. You've got a completely new frame, different from what the Interceptor and the Continental GT had, a little more sophisticated in some ways. In terms of the suspension setup, USDs up front, 43mm Showa forks. Now, this is the first time Royal Enfield has ever fitted USDs onto a motorcycle from the factory, and I want to talk about what that's like in a bit. Below me, you've got twin shocks, and I need to talk about the travel. You've got 120mm of travel up front, 101mm of travel at the rear. Well, first let's talk about ride quality, and I must say the ride is actually quite impressive. The front end, it has a real sophistication to it. You know, the way it deals with bumps, the way it deals with undulations in the roads, it feels really nice. It feels really well sorted. You can ride it over a typical Indian road with little bumps and undulations, and it soaks things up really nicely. The rear, I think it's a little firmer than the front. You do feel it a little bit more at the rear, but by no means is it uncomfortable. You can ride it over a typical Indian road without trouble. On a smooth highway, it's stable, it's planted, it feels absolutely confidence inspiring, and overall I must say that the ride is really impressive. Over really sharp bumps, you do feel a little bit of kick in the rear. I'm also a light rider. I don't think I'm getting into the full travel of the suspension, but I think when you load the bike up, it'll feel a little more settled over those sort of roads. But overall, really impressed with the motorcycle in terms of ride, at least. In terms of handling, now this is a cruiser. All those geometry changes, the fact that it's a longer bike, the fact that the rake is pushed out, the fact that the trail is longer, all of that makes it, well, a lazier bike on the road. So say you want to get into a corner, you steer in, it doesn't respond immediately, you know, it's a little bit of a lazy response. And that's okay for the nature of the motorcycle. I don't mind it at all. Now, I haven't ridden on really windy roads. The roads outside here in Jaisalmer are fairly straight, mostly ambling along with the occasional sweeping corner, and on such roads I think the chassis really shines. I think it feels really nice over a long sweeping bend. You can just get it tipped over, it holds its line really comfortably. The suspension works even if there are little mid-corner bumps, it absorbs it really well, and you can just power out of the corner. On tighter, narrower corners, I'm gonna have to reserve my opinion on that till I ride it on such roads, but on large sweeping corners, on straight roads, it feels really nice. The weight, that is something that we need to talk about. 241 kilos wet. Do you feel that weight? On the go, you don't feel it. I think it's really well balanced. Once you're moving, once you're rolling, the weight is not something that will bother you. Where you do need to be careful of the weight is when you're in traffic or when you're trying to take a U-turn. At that point, the weight can catch you out. It can tip over, and if you're not aware of what's happening, you may be dropping the bike. So just be wary that it is a heavy bike. Try and be careful when you're taking U-turns, and well, in the city, if you have to maneuver it, get it in and out of parkings, all of that might be a little cumbersome, because when it's standing, when it's at standstill, you do feel that weight. But on the go, it's beautiful, it's effortless. So to sum up, I think the engine and the chassis, they come together really beautifully. I think you've got a nice tractable motor, a motor that has plenty of performance, generous performance for the sort of bike this is. And with this chassis setup, which is comfortable, which is lazy steering, really relaxed, really enjoyable, something that doesn't make you be on your toes, but something that you can just sit back, kick back, relax and enjoy riding, I think it works really, really well. This is a motorcycle that puts a smile on your face. You know, you get onto it, you've got 800 kilometers ahead of you, you just kick back, relax and enjoy those 800 kilometers. It's not a bike that's fussy, it's not a bike that's stressful to ride. You just got to get into the zone, put your lid on and hit the road, and it'll just jog on and on and on, and you will enjoy yourself on this saddle. Now the prices. Royal Enfield has announced prices of the Super Meteor 650, and they start at rupees 3.48 lakhs, while the Tourer variant we're riding costs rupees 3.78 lakhs ex-showroom. That makes this about rupees 60,000 more expensive than the Interceptor in its base trim, which is exactly what we were expecting. Now, as for its rivals, it doesn't have any real direct rivals. I think the closest bike that comes to it would be the Benelli 502C, but this sits in a space of its own, and I think it really claims that space for its own. I think where it really shines is it takes that big bike experience, the stuff that Harleys and Indians and even some of the Triumphs do really well, that big bike cruiser experience, and packages it into a smaller, more affordable, more accessible package. And that's where its strengths are. It feels so impressive. It feels like such a deeply impressive motorcycle, and yet it comes in at a really strong price. The way that it rides on the road, the way that it feels, little touches like this fuel filler cap, it feels so good. Stuff like that makes it a really nice motorcycle. Royal Enfield has been really nailing its bikes over the last few years, and I think the Super Meteor, it's nailed that one as well.